Hello and welcome to another Learning is Change podcast. This is a little bit different format for what we've been doing recently, but I had the opportunity and I'm really excited to speak with Robert Kaplinsky. Hopefully I got that right. And love to sort of talk through something that he's been working on for the better part of a year called Observe Me. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Ben Wilkoff. I am the Director of Blended and Personalized Learning in Aurora Public Schools. And Robert, would you introduce yourself and where you are in the world and kind of what you've been working on with Observe Me?
Thank you. So my name is Robert Kaplinsky. I'm a full-time math teacher specialist in a school district in Downey, California, Downey Unified School District. I've been in education since 2003, and I live in Long Beach. So the idea of Observe Me, kind of just generally speaking, came from this idea that I think that the most important moments I've had in my career have come from the opportunities where during lesson study, I get to watch other teachers practice, and it gives me great opportunities to learn from them, but also opportunities to kind of reflect on the own choices, on the choices I make, the teacher moves I make when I'm by myself. And I found it to be really valuable. Heather Cohn, someone on Twitter, also shared a tweet of a sign that she saw. And what resonated about me was that a teacher was willing to make himself vulnerable by inviting other people in and welcoming feedback. And it just seems so profound, and it was almost that profoundness that surprised me, because how have we gotten to a place in education where the simple idea of inviting someone into our class to watch us, when that's profound, something's, I think, categorically wrong. We should maintain sort of an open environment where people are welcomed in and they can teach us. And it's important to realize that as much as this might seem like, oh, I'm going to help other people by showing them amazing things I'm doing, it's actually got a very strong selfish component. Wouldn't you love to learn from the experiences of someone else? I hope the best teachers in the world come into my classroom and tell me all the things I could be doing better. And so that's sort of what the idea of Observe Me is all about.
So I'm really interested in what you just said around that your practice was the first thing that you thought of, that you were really looking at Observe Me as a tool for your own practice, rather than like, oh, this could be something really big and enormous that so many people could take advantage of. You know, I'm super intrigued by the idea that you have had these moments of understanding and of that have been transformative for you. What's an example of a moment where someone gave you feedback and you found that to be sort of a moment of clarity or transformation for you?
So one goal that might sound strange is my goal is to be the least helpful teacher possible.
Okay. All right.
An analogy to kind of crystallize that is, think of a teacher as a spotter and the students are doing the bench press. The spotter's job is to give the student the least amount of help possible so that the bench presser can lift the weight. If the spotter gives too much help, then the bench presser doesn't get stronger. And so just finding that right amount when you have like 30, 40 kids that are all lifting different amounts of weight and at different levels of tiredness is challenging. So sometimes observers will ask me, like, why didn't you help them? Or why didn't you ask that? Or why did you do that? Or you could have said this. And depending on the situation, sometimes I'm like, yeah, you're totally right. I didn't even think about that. Maybe that would have been a better question that would have given them just a small hint, but not too much, and I maybe led them too much. So that helps the active conversation we have during the actual observations are really helpful. And just to clarify one thing, so in my role as a teacher specialist, I'm frequently teaching lessons and having people observe me, and I'm also observing others. So I already had observed me kind of in a non, I guess, what should I say? It wasn't actually spelled out, but I had the experiences on a common basis. And I wanted other people to be able to have those opportunities as well. So I formalized it and then turned it into this sort of hashtag, which I would hope, I mean, everyone hopes that it will take off, but you don't really know what will happen until it starts resonating with people. And so I basically just try to give an opportunity for others to have the same experience.
Yeah, and I think that the fact that you started from a place of where this was a part of your practice already. You were already engaged in observe me practices and sort of opening up your classroom to be transparent and to share your practice with others. That kind of allowed you to see it for sort of what it is. So the most compelling part of Observe Me is the teacher-led part of it and sort of the empowerment, right? Like that a teacher can post up, a piece of paper that says, observe me, and these are the things that you should be looking for, or that I want feedback on, and that there is some ownership aspect of that. How have you seen that ownership really take root in people that have started to work through an Observe Me protocol?
That's a really interesting question, because I think that what has become the case is that observations are things that are done to teachers and are not things that are chosen by teachers. And so the sheer idea of asking someone, what do you want to get feedback on so you can get better at it, is kind of a sometimes new question. And to some degree, teachers don't have a lot of experience even reflecting on, well, what do you want? Like, what is it, something that I want to improve on? And so that's been worthwhile, just even reflecting on what it is that you want to improve on. But then it takes you to the next stage, which is how do you articulate that in a way that's productive to somebody else? One thing that I've been seeing a lot of is how do you articulate your goal? Consider, like, for example, engagement. Sometimes, so one of the key tenets of this Observe Me sentence is that you list what you would like feedback on. So sometimes people will say, I would like feedback on student engagement. So that's useful, but consider, like, for example, that versus are students engaged versus how can I help students become more engaged versus, what suggestions do you have for improving student engagement? Even the way that you set the question up really will affect the way you get feedback. For example, am I doing a good job with student engagement? Think about what it would be like to answer that question as an observer. To say something like no or yeah, but would feel almost like you're about to insult this person and they will never invite you back into the classroom. So you're just in the way that you asked the question, you've made it less likely for people to feel comfortable to honestly give you feedback. Versus, what suggestions do you have for me to increase student engagement? Well, now you've broken that wall down and now you're begging them, please tell me, what could I do? And so even just thinking about both, what do I want feedback on and how will I craft that goal to maximize the likelihood I get useful feedback? I mean, another thing that's just as bad as no, you're not doing a good job is, oh yeah, everything's great. People will err on the side of being too kind, but too kind can often be useless. If someone's put in so much effort that they want you to come in there, they don't want, yeah, great job. They want very specific feedback so they can become even more excellent.
Yeah, and it strikes me that we don't often get to determine, so as educators, we don't often get to determine the lens with which our classroom practice is seen. And so to me, this feels very much like a shift in the way in which teachers are observed. So being able to say, this is the lens that I need because this is what I want to work on. This is the thing that I'm really passionate about getting better at. And so if there is a way in which we can support teachers in sort of crafting that, like the lens that they want to be seen or things like that, how have you worked with teachers either in your own building or other folks who are taking this Observe Me and running with it? How have you worked with folks in getting them to sort of recognize what makes for a really good question or a good lens to come in and observe with?
Yeah, that has been challenging. Sometimes we talk about areas that they're struggling. For example, just some common ones are getting students to articulate their reasoning, or having a safe classroom culture, or improving, and mind you, I'm specifically in mathematics, so I'm looking at this through a mathematics lens. How do you increase students' ability to be a better problem solver? So just in those three, you can have meaty goals there. I mean, I don't care what subject. I don't think there's any teacher who's saying that my students are amazingly always, without doubt, articulating themselves well. And to actually get suggestions from other teachers, I mean, as a math teacher, I would love, for example, for an English language arts teacher to come into my classroom and give me tons of advice on maybe prompts or structures for improving students' ability to articulate their reasoning. Essentially just thinking about, I mean, sometimes you have to take it back to what is their goal. Unfortunately, a lot of times the goals are test-driven. So you would say, like, well, my students are going to be expected to write paragraphs, and they're not doing that. It can also be kind of smaller chunks of, like, how do you review homework, or how can I make more effective use of a warm-up? So you have some aspects of that. And going back to something you were mentioning is also that observations tend to have a summative feel versus these are more of a formative feel. And I love this quote I heard recently, which is that when the chef tastes the soup, that's formative assessment. But when the customer tastes the soup, that's summative assessment. So this is a chance for the chefs to taste their own soup and get an idea of what tweaks they can make. And it's important to realize that the intended observers, from my point of view, are other peers. It's not necessary, for example, it's definitely not parents. It's definitely not students. It's not, and it's not to say that there's not value from getting them, but that's not the goal that I had originally had. It's really from other people who are in the trenches with you, trying to do the same things as you, so you know that they have the same credibility and that they are going through the same trials and tribulations. Administrators could definitely do observations because they are also in the same trench. But it's important to have this formative feel like this is not done to you. This is something that you're requesting because you want to be a better teacher. And it's important then also that it's optional. You can't mandate that your teachers all do this. You can hope and you can inspire if for example, you're a site administrator, you could be the one to start it. I mean, consider if you're a principal, you post an observe me time before a staff meeting and say, listen, I'd like some feedback on this. I'm trying to make a good use of your time. How can I, communicate information in a way that makes sense and is efficient? Based on how you respond to that information, it's going to send a really, actions are louder than words. It'll show them that if you can do it without biting their head off from the feedback and grow from it and respond from it, then they will be more likely to do it. And that's really the way it grows. It should be kind of somewhat viral, that you see other people doing it and then you want to do it as well.
Yeah. Well, and so I came to sort of understand Observe Me as a idea, as a movement, simply by being in a school where it was already taking place. And so I was at a middle school in St. Vrain Valley School District in Colorado, and they said they sort of put out. So this was a teacher leader who put out, we could do Japanese lesson study, we could do, I think there was a third option, or we could do an Observe Me model where teachers decide what they want to be observed for, and that they would be sort of supported with a Google form, their own Google form, and sort of whoever goes in, they do a, grab the QR code, and they are pulling up that form in order to provide feedback to that teacher based upon a customized set of questions that teacher has decided. And that was really interesting to me that they had sort of taken this from the web, right? Like, I can't imagine that you have had direct contact. I mean, they were very aware of your work and things like that, but that you had worked with them. So they took it off the shelf and sort of made it theirs. But I'm interested from your perspective, and so I was very excited about that, but I'm interested from your perspective, what does it mean to be, to implement Observe Me? What does it look like in your own school? And in your own context, does it look exactly like that? Is it some variation on that? I'd love to know what it means to really implement Observe Me from like beginning to end.
Lots of good questions. Let me kind of start with your comparison of the choice between lesson study and Observe Me. So I've actually I've taught middle school for 8 years, and now this is my 7th year out of the classroom as a teacher specialist. So I don't have my own classroom, but as part of being a teacher specialist, I actually did 3 years of lesson study, probably around 70 days of actual observations. And there are a lot of similarities between lesson study and Observe Me, but where it diverges is sort of the intentionality, like instead of study, like what's common is that they're both about observing students and seeing how they learn from a lesson. But whereas lesson study, you might have a lot of intentional planning and teaching a lesson with a lot of same people, it's much more formal of a process than, say, Observe Me, which is people can stop by whenever and wherever. The basic idea, in terms of you asked about the whole process of Observe Me, would be that you would first kind of create an Observe Me sign. You would start with the idea of what is it that you really want to improve on. Again, for me, I think it'd be hard to find a teacher who doesn't want some sort of aspect of improving problem solving or critical thinking or articulating their reasoning orally or in writing. I mean, I don't care what subject you're in. You're going to want those things using evidence. Whether it's science, social studies, math, or ELA, I think you're going to want that. Once you've crafted those goals, you really want to be thoughtful about, well, how do you craft them? We kind of talked about it before, but again, there's a difference between just saying, I want feedback on making students better problem solvers. You want it maybe perhaps more of a how or a why question. How can I improve my students' ability to be a better problem solver? Or why do you think, or why are students not articulating their answers when I ask them questions using elaborate responses? Something like that, which will tend to get the observer to give you more feedback. The next thing you want to do is think about publicity. I guess the first part of publicity would be, I would always recommend checking with your site admin. I'd be shocked to hear of a site admin that is not giving their blessing to this idea, but they might have their own kind of project in mind for, say, learning walks or something like that. So it's important to make sure that they're aware of this. From there, once you have their blessing, you have to realize that you can't just put the sign up and then expect people will come. You might start with, if you're in secondary, for example, you might think, well, if I have, say, third period prep, I might want to talk to other teachers who have third period prep and see if they are able to come. Obviously, if someone doesn't have third period prep, it takes more planning. So if you have other people who are interested, like, say, other people in your department, you might say, hey, if you don't have third period prep, maybe you talk to the admin and see if they can, cover a person's class for a little bit. I'm sure where there's a will, there's a way. I mean, I can't fathom the administrator who's not going to try to do what they can to support something like this. And then once you do that, I mean, even in the whole observation cycle, when you get feedback, if it's not the right kind of feedback that you're wanting, like if it's too overly positive, you've got to think, like, if your goal is, am I doing a good job with getting kids to think? Well, what do you really expect they're going to say? Versus how can I improve students' ability to think? So there'll be some kind of cycles of just revising your goals and letting people know. But from what I've seen, like this guy, Nate Bowling in Tacoma, said that the feedback he's gotten from Observe Me has better than any evaluation he's had in his career. I mean, that one statement makes the whole thing worth it. And I'm hoping that other people have it. But I guess the last thing I'll say is, once this gets out there, it's everyone for themselves. I mean, people are going to tweak it and make it their own. I have ideas of how I think it's going to go, but the nature of the beast is that people will kind of like, for example, there's pineapple charts, and people have been kind of equating pineapple charts and Observe Me, but they're different in a lot of ways, and so you can kind of combine them with other initiatives, but
pineapple charts is a new thing to me. I don't know what pineapple charts are.
So what I've heard about pineapple charts is this idea of lots of great things happen in classrooms, but people don't know about them. And so if you were to make a chart that said, hey, I'm doing such and such, like I'm doing an activity where students are using algebra tiles, or my students are going to be writing an essay, and you could just walk into, say, the staff lounge and see, here's a chart of all the great things happening. You could then choose what you want to do. The wonderful thing about that is it's a great way to communicate what things are going on, and you can know that about that. But an important distinction is that that's more one-sided, like, hey, observer, I'm doing awesome stuff. You can come learn from me. Where I feel observe me is more of more of a mutually beneficial situation where, yes, you can come learn from me, but here's what I would like you to help me with since you're here. And so I see that as slightly different, but I do see a lot of tweets and social media about people kind of saying that you could do them together, and you could, but you just have to be intentional and kind of thoughtful about the differences between them.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the sort of the overview of both of those ideas. I mean, because Observe Me is not yours necessarily, right? It's owned by everyone who uses it and sort of has really taken it on. What do you feel like are the most important conditions that are necessary for it to take hold?
I mean, I guess there's essentially maybe 3 components. That's a really good question. I don't know if I thought of it quite like that. I mean, the first is being really thoughtful about your goals. You want lofty goals, but not ones that are so far off that, how can I perfectly do this? I mean, think about what would be, here's a question. If you could be a fly on your own room, what would you want to know? Like, would you want to know, are students actually talking when I ask them to turn and talk to each other? Because you can't be in every place at once. So being very thoughtful about what your goals are and realizing that this is an opportunity to have more eyes and ears in your room and get more perspectives, that's essentially what you want to use. The next thing you want to think about is sort of publicity. Just how do you actually share this message? Because you don't want this to be the best lesson that no one comes to. But people need to know about it, and they need to know that it's not just, really in terms of messaging, you got to be careful that it's not like, I'm awesome, if you want to come learn from me, then, and you could be awesome too, then come on by. That's not what it's about. It's really, even really just putting vulnerability into your goals of, hey, I want to get better at this, I would love to learn from you, is much better than, I'm awesome and come check this out. And then the third part is really just, how do you respond to the feedback? If someone gives you some tough feedback and you just dismiss them, I don't know that they're going to want to come back. But if you're like, wow, I really appreciated this and this was really valuable, and then you share that out with other people, I have to believe that that's going to be worthwhile. Because remember, the observer is being vulnerable as well as the observed. They're taking their own unpaid time, perhaps their own prep time, to come give you feedback. They could have just sat back there and left. So they spent time trying to craft feedback that they would hope you would find useful. And so you giving some sort of validation back to them will encourage them to want to interact with you more.
Do you feel like other teachers in your building have benefited from Observe Me, even though they are not doing it themselves? That there is some sort of network effect? Or another way to think about it might be, does Observe Me work even if you are not participating?
Okay, two good questions there. In terms of my own district, I guess it's safe to say that no man's a prophet in their own land. And so I can't just be like, hey, everyone read my post, it's awesome. So some people are doing it in my district, far from the majority. I hope it'll grow, but again, I can't tell people to do it. They need to choose to do it of their own choice. But yeah, I'd like to believe that Observe Me will come and go. But I hope that it starts. The scariest part is that essentially educators could be more like independent contractors and colleagues. You're essentially a teacher in your room. How many times everyone knows a teacher who basically comes to school, stays in the room, and then leaves at the end of the day. And that kind of lack of collaboration benefits nobody. And so if all it was that when this kind of fades away is that people are now thinking, yeah, we're better together. I hope it's the most obvious statement that we're better together. Like, the group is always smarter than the smartest person in the group. I would love to learn everyone's best techniques. It's going to make me better. It's going to then make everyone else better. The students that you have this year will be better, and then it'll help the teachers the next year. I don't see who loses from this. And so that's my goal right there. And that's so in terms of sort of positive fallout, that's what I'm thinking is happening. It changes the culture and the expectations, I hope.
Yeah, so I think that idea of change in culture is a lot of where I see, like if I am more transparent, then other people are more encouraged to be transparent, and that they're more able to bring forth their practice and share it. I'm interested in, so let's say that there are a number of schools, and you know this to be true, that are doing this, and there are a number of teachers who have said, put the sheet up, and they've encouraged people to come, they've publicized, they've been reflective about their practice. How is it that that practice gets shared in a way, right? Like, so are you encouraging folks to share the feedback that is about their the classroom? Are you encouraging people to take pictures and to do that? Like, how is it that we can all benefit from someone coming into your classroom and observing and really focusing on the things that you have said you wanted to focus on? Does that question make sense?
It does. It's a very complex question. So there's something very personal about the interaction between the observer and the observed, and I think just with it will be in general hard to share specific lessons learned that the observed learned from the observer and share it with other people in a way that's meaningful for them. I think what is meaningful though is some people will start to feel discouraged if no one comes by. And so if you can just share at a minimum, hey, someone came by and it was useful, and especially if you struggled in the beginning, like at first I didn't have people coming by, but then I did X, Y, and Z, and then it improved, and here's what I got. I think that that's important to do because it's very much like so many other things in life, whether it's a New Year's resolution to eat healthy, and if you don't kind of get more support from your neighbors and other people who are saying, yeah, I know it can be hard, you're likely to quit. And so kind of a collective support group and just, sharing strategies. I made a page on my site called Troubleshooting Observe Me, where I'm trying to grow a list of concerns and issues people have had. It's been everything from, feedback is overly positive to no one's coming to observe me, to my administrator was frustrated that I didn't check in with them. And so just lessons learned from there. I mean, again, we're so much better together. So if we can take everyone's lessons learned, I think it's going to make us more likely to be successful from the beginning.
Yeah. So where you're sort of coming at it from is by telling the story, essentially, of what it is like, right? What it is like to be able to own the whole observation process, essentially, where I am sort of able to share, like, these are the things that I'm working on, these are my goals, and sharing the story of what it was like when people either came or didn't come, and what you did differently out of the process. Yeah, to me, there's a lot of value there.
Yeah, I mean, Simon Sinek and his Start with the Why. I mean, essentially, by sharing what you got out of it, you're selling the why. The how and the what are less significant. I mean, the what, which is what you actually learned, is probably the least significant. But selling the why would you even want to do this? This is not necessarily traditional. It's not at all part of your job description. But so why would you want to go out of your way to do this? And I think that's an important thing to sell. Once people are convinced that this is something they would even want to do, then you can get into the how, of the practicality of how do you actually logistically set this up. And really what you would actually do. So yeah, I think the best thing that people could do is share why they're doing this and why it's worthwhile to be vulnerable.
All right. Well, I do feel like maybe we only have time for one more question. So I really appreciate you taking the time and sort of talking through this idea. I'm interested in maybe your own story of what's the most important thing that you have learned either about yourself or about teaching and learning in general as a result of taking part in Observe Me and really fostering the community around it.
All right, so this is perhaps not what you'd expect, but what I've come to realize is that education has nothing to do with math content or with educational content at all. It's so much about the relationships. And just whether it's the relationships with students, the relationships with your colleagues, with your administrators, with even yourself in terms of your expectations of yourself. It's so easy to teach someone to get better at math content, but it's so challenging to get people to be reflective and want to grow, want to learn. And even just, I mean, I think it's not hard to envision that you could share feedback that would make someone want to shut down immediately. So even just learning the social etiquettes of, for example, we practice a 5-to-1 ratio of positive, like I thought this was going well, I thought this was going well, 5 positives, and then picking one challenge, because sometimes you might want to be like, here are 5 challenges and one good thing, or maybe no good things. I mean, so even if someone is asking for feedback, if you just beat down on them, that maybe, you know, turn them off as well. So really just learning about relationships and working with people and adult learning theories and just how you interact and communicate with one another has been extremely humbling.
Well, I really appreciate your time, Robert. Thank you so much for telling your story and the story of Observe Me. Obviously, it's something that I'm going to continue to work on, and I hope that we get to continue to sort of share the story of how this grows and changes and is supported over time.
Well, thank you for having me. It really means a lot. Great questions. I hope that we can get people to feel supported in this kind of vulnerable time, but that we can, I mean, what would be the most amazing thing would be to share your journey, not necessarily you, but really anyone who's doing this, share your journey, share your struggles. It'll only make it feel more authentic and make people feel more supported in the process. So thank you.
Absolutely. All right. I'll talk to you later, man.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.